Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer, and with me is my good friend, Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor. So today's topic is why use groundwork? Like when to use it, why to use it, but groundwork with our horses, what does it do? Why would we use it? When would we need it? And
Mhm.
I thought it was a great topic to talk about today because when I started with my first horse, who was pretty dangerous to ride, I didn't know anything about groundwork. I got my first horse after years on lesson horses, walk, trot, canter, go through the jump course, and that was all I knew about riding a horse. And then my first horse was an off the track thoroughbred when I was 16, and it ran away with me, bucked me off, and I didn't even consider that, like, oh, there might be something I could do on the ground to maybe help my horse, not be safer to ride, right?
Right.
So I think that's the number one reason people think about doing groundwork with horses is to get the horse safe to ride. But
Yeah,
I
kind of like I remember the days of lunging them until they drop.
making them tired,
Making them
again,
tired
safe to
was the
ride,
goal.
right?
I never thought to use groundwork as a educational tool
Or
when I
as
first
part of
started.
development.
Right. It never entered my mind. I was always taught lunge the horse for warm up.
Yeah, and I didn't even know how to lunge as a teenager. I was like, what's that?
And then I had that off the track thoroughbred that the same thing that bucked me off, ran away with me, all that. And I always thought, even a solid hour of lunging, I still had the same issues in
Yeah,
the
that's what
show
happens
ring.
to most people.
Yeah.
It's like, I think lunging is the first groundwork exercise everybody learns, and it's
Mm,
always with the idea of wearing the horse out, getting the horse a little bit tired so the horse is safer to ride. Like that is probably the number one reason people learn to lunge horses. And I go,
yeah.
it's just so off the mark as a developmental tool. And I think people are often surprised, like we were talking about earlier. I use groundwork throughout training. Like
Right.
I can use it as a tool to help a horse learn how to balance in the walk, in the trot, in the canter, overcome um, different behavioral issues that might be dangerous to ride, develop the learning frame of mind. Like I can use groundwork as a way to help my horse become safe to ride. But a lot of people are surprised that I use groundwork all the time with horses that are perfectly safe to ride.
Hmm.
I use it as a tool of developing balance. So that means the different groundwork techniques I use or strategies, they're interspersed throughout training, even
Right.
once my horse is very safe to ride and very cooperative. Sometimes it's just easier for the horse to make the next change in their coordination without weight on their back.
Right. Especially if the rider is not, really educated on how to use their own body so that they're not interfering.
Yeah.
They're, yeah.
So if the rider is working on their balance and it's a little challenging to find that stability as a rider on that particular horse, then you can over prepare the horse with groundwork to make the horse
Mhm.
easier to ride, not just safer to ride, but easier to ride. But even after sort of like with your help and the Alexander technique, becoming a better rider,
Mhm.
even if I can ride through it, what I find is sometimes just the factor of having weight and mass on their back can be a hindrance to the development step that I'm looking for. Sometimes it's
That's
the
a good way to
most
look at it.
helpful thing to do is sometimes to get the change in balance or coordination in the horse and bump them up a notch. sometimes being on the horse is the most effective way to get that done. But no matter how well you ride, sometimes just being off the horse is singularly the fastest way to get that change.
Yeah, and I had that experience with my big mare with her intermittent lameness, which she has a pinched nerve in her neck, and she just about a month ago it had happened to come back, and I thought, what am I missing? Yes, I just questioned what am I missing? And so I started doing groundwork and really being the observer. Like what's the piece when I'm riding that I don't feel, I don't see?
Right.
And what it boiled down to is when she would come to a halt, she would park out and arch her back a little bit, and I wasn't feeling it.
Mm.
So I did 3 weeks of groundwork and it made a huge difference.
Yeah. And I think you said you did the long reins on a small circle as your
Long reins on
groundwork,
a really small circle.
which can help stabilize the twisting function or rotation of the spine left to right and has the effect of increasing engagement of the hindquarters. So the long reins on a small circle really builds the stability of the back and the hindquarter, which would alleviate the overuse of the neck, which is where
Yeah.
she has her problem.
hmm
So did you feel after doing just groundwork for 3 weeks when you got back on, first of all, why did you decide to get back on? Why did you wait 3 weeks and then decide to get back on? What were you seeing? And
it's always an intention with me. I could not get her to go forward, and I was breaking a sweat chasing her.
okay, so that
And
would
I
be
went, okay, there,
we've reached maximum change on the long reins.
yeah, I should not be spending like having to drive her from behind. I'm not accomplishing the task.
Right.
We're at the beginning of the phase, she was willing to move forward, but the forward because she was unbalanced. So I think once she got 3 to 4 weeks into it, got a little bit more balance, it was like, I'm done with this. I don't need to do this anymore.
Yeah, and that can happen. Like, and that I think is to me the most useful strategy with groundwork is you noticed that the neck issue resurfaced and she was showing a little lameness. And so instead of going, nothing I'm doing is working, which is our normal reaction, you went, what am I missing?
What am I
And
missing? Or
what
we
am I
always go
missing?
to, I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah, I'm doing
We
something wrong.
always punish ourselves. Um, but I usually always try to ask the question, what am I missing? What am
And
I not
sometimes
feeling, seeing?
getting off the horse and being able to see our horses move, no matter what groundwork strategy we're using, is super helpful for sort of putting on our detective hats and sleuthing out the problem rather than going, this isn't working. Why am I having
hmm
a big setback? What am I doing wrong? Why can't my horse, blah, blah, blah.
And
It's like, no,
it's,
we
I
just
think,
need to sort out the problem.
for both of us, and maybe this isn't for everybody, we ride alone a lot.
Oh, me too. Yeah,
Yeah, both of us. So we don't have, say, eyes on the ground
right.
to help us. So sometimes it's kind of like taking that back step. It's stepping back and looking at the whole picture and like, what am I missing?
Right. What is she
I'm missing,
doing?
yeah, what am I missing? What do I need to change?
So when you
And
put her on the long reins, you could see that every time she halted, she was parking out
yeah,
and disengaging backwards.
just totally disengaging.
So, and this is also common to sort of tell me that I'm adopting the right strategy for the horse at the right time. Because
Mm,
it's not whether the strategy is really right or wrong, or we're good or bad, or it's, um, I always find that the horse shows me the appropriate strategy at the appropriate time
yeah.
because it starts to work. It starts to affect some changes that I'm looking for. And that's how I know that getting off the horse, going back to groundwork, number one, you could see the problem, which you needed to know about. And number two, for 2 weeks and 5 days, she was moving herself forward without you having to push a lot.
Right.
It might have been slow, but she was maybe maintaining her forward motion without a lot of driving or whip action on a small circle on the long reins. So that tells you, okay, she can do this exercise. Let's see what happens if we repeat it.
Hmm.
And so as you repeated the exercise, what changes did you see that you were hoping for before she lost forward, which is another, like, I'll go over that too. That's really common that any
Right.
strategy we pick, whether it's under saddle or on the ground, will work for so long and then suddenly not work.
Right. And we as humans get very stuck in that groove
Yeah.
of it's working, yay, everything, I'm doing it right.
Yeah.
And then bam,
Bam. Yes. Doesn't work.
it doesn't work. And we're like, what's going on? Instead of going, okay. And I think having enough tools in your tool belt of what to try, to seek out what works and what doesn't work.
Well, and if you think of it in terms of like Alexander technique or your experience with people, as soon as you begin the process of learning better self-control over your own body, better mechanical function, you're not the same person anymore.
Right.
But the learning never stops. The evolution never stops. It's not like you find a point of finality and woohoo, I'm a
Yeah.
perfectly moving human in all scenarios, right? It's kind of an ongoing process that just keeps improving over time. But with each improvement, sometimes a new layer of challenge comes up. Sometimes
Hmm.
it's an old habit that resurfaces. So it's no different for people than it is for horses. So, like I think we talked about before, sometimes what looks like a setback, which is right the moment that the human wants to make the horse do it,
Ah,
right? Because all of a sudden, our strategy that was working yesterday, we're having to sort of push or get heavy or really struggle to accomplish the same strategy today that was relatively easy 3 days ago. What happened? And I
right.
go,
Right.
either mission accomplished or we've reached sort of the maximum amount of change that we're going to get within that strategy for now.
Right.
It doesn't mean we can't come back to it again and again and again. But like you probably saw on the long reins, the first week or two while she's forward, you may also see that she was getting more engaged, that she was lengthening the neck again and releasing that tightness through the neck.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point of engagement, the stopping or you having to push her just to maintain forward usually means, okay, I'm engaged, but this is way too hard on this size circle,
Yeah.
right? So it's like the smaller circle helped her find the engagement, but maintaining the engagement felt really difficult for her.
Hmm.
So in that moment, we would have the option to stay on the ground and maybe make the circle bigger and easier to maintain the forward. Maybe walk with her, staying close like a small circle, but a moving small circle. That might have helped. Or what you opted to do was say, okay, enough of the long reins. Let me get back on and see what we've got.
Hmm.
Let's go back to riding. So what happened when you got on? Did you feel a difference from that time on the long reins in her movement?
What I felt, and I only felt it a couple of times, which I've never felt on her before, was her one hind leg come up under into break phase. I've never felt that engagement on her before.
Excellent.
Yeah. And
Eh,
she was getting better at, how do I put this, not stopping, because I had to work with that a lot on the long line so she didn't park out again. So
Right.
she could keep walking and still, graze or do what needed to be done without halting and going into the park out.
Yeah, because the parking out is not just a stopping of forward motion, it's actually pushing the motion backwards.
Mm,
So they first have to stop and then they sort of push their energy backwards. And so if you can keep the forward motion and maybe under saddle, it was easier to get the same tight turns, but not have to stay on a circle. So you
hmm.
could kind of go in and out of that step of more engagement. And what you described, feeling the landing of the hind hoof, I go, that to me is the minimum requirement of engagement.
Hmm.
And so often I'll ask riders, can you feel the landing of each hind hoof? And they're like, nah, not so much. I just don't have, and again, every person says the same thing. I just don't have enough feel to tell where my horse's hind legs are. And I go, if you know the difference between hot and cold water, you have plenty of feel. The reason, I go, the reason you can't feel where the hind feet are landing is because they're not landing close enough to the center of the body to be felt, which means your horse is disengaged. Or we could say not engaged enough to get off the front end.
Good
Like
point.
if we can't feel the landing of each hind hoof clearly through our seat in the saddle, then it's not that we don't have feel, it's that the hind legs are not close enough to be felt.
They're pushing instead of pushing backwards instead of coming up under the horse.
Exactly. So we lack engagement of the hindquarters if we can't feel each hind hoof landing clearly. Like we should just feel boom, boom, boom. We know where each hind hoof is as it lands because we feel that sort of wave of force under our seat.
And it's a throughness. We've talked about this before, but I don't know if we've shared it on the podcast, but you can feel when that you feel that hind hoof, you can feel that energy move through the back.
I'm going to write that down as a topic. I don't think we've ever done a topic
We
on
haven't. I don't think we've done
throughness.
anything on throughness. I mean, we talk about it a lot, us,
Yeah.
together, but
No, I love
um,
that term throughness and what it
mhm,
means. So that'll be
yeah,
another podcast. But
yeah,
for today, the focus is groundwork. So,
yes.
like what you're describing is exactly the reason I go in and out between riding and groundwork and riding and groundwork, no matter what level I'm riding at, no matter
Mm,
how well balanced the horse is. Like, for example, I went back to long reins on a small circle because I had two horses in my barn that every time they would go faster than a walk, um, one would just, I'd have to like drive with a whip just to
mhm.
maintain 10 strides of trot. Like he just would not trot, resisted trot, would buck a bit or act out. Every time I would ask for trot, it was just this disastrous pushback, right? And the trot would be shuffly and slow and lethargic, even if I could get the trot with a lot of effort. And another horse in my barn would willingly go into the trot, but always come up lame after a trot, whether it was
Wow.
groundwork or riding, he would just come up lame. And he has, navicular issues and ring bone, so it wasn't a huge surprise, but I had to postpone. I had to work a long time at the walk with both horses, but I could keep increasing engagement. I could keep balancing the straightness. I could do everything I needed to do for the coordination of balance at the walk. And then I thought, well, I'm going to try the trot. And the horse that used to resist trot all the time, I thought I'll try it on the long reins without weight on his back and see if it's easier than what I was getting under saddle. It used to be lunge line, long reins, or riding. The trot was crap no matter how you sliced it or diced it. And so I went, well, let me try it because he's well engaged on a small circle on the long reins. I'm just going to try the trot. So without a whip, I just sort of used the long rein to tap him a bit and say, could you trot? And he launched, to my great surprise, he launched into an energetic trot and held it for 5 minutes on a tiny circle.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, we're ready to work on trot. And he's been able to work on it every day in small doses on the long reins, and it's consistently gotten better and easier for him with some ups and downs along the way. So I'm looking at it going, I'm going to try that under saddle. I think we're
Hmm.
ready. Right. So his shuffly resistance to trot, um, it's like once the body was better coordinated to the level that he needed, the trot was there.
Right.
And if I had as well, and I did, I've worked with this horse a long time. So there were times in the past where I was driving with my legs. I was cracking with the whip. I was pushing him on the lunge line, sort of going through that phase of thinking, if you could just hold the trot, you would get better at it. And that's just how humans think. We all fall into that trap, and then finally I pulled my head out of my butt and went, okay, I know better. Like, quit
I
doing
know
this,
better.
right?
Silly
Quit doing
human.
this. Silly human. His lack of desire to trot.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
What I really know is that means he's not comfortable in the coordination of his body, even at walk. So I did a big fallback and spent months at the walk, but tightened up the circle of the long reins,
Hmm.
right? Tightened up the circles under saddle, asked him to be more engaged, balance the braking and pushing elements, whether I was doing groundwork or on the saddle, under saddle. And for a period of time, riding him was where I got the best changes. So I'd ride every day. And then all of a sudden, under saddle, I would start to get more resistance. He would start getting creative in his sort of ways.
Creative.
Yeah, he's very creative horse. And he would get very creative in his resistances. So I go, okay, maybe it's time to go back to groundwork. And sure enough, he would do better when I was off of his back. Right. And I think people think if I'm doing groundwork, it means I can't ride well.
Oh,
And that's just an ego thing. I go, it has nothing to
that's true.
do. I go, if we ride really badly, then doing groundwork can be helpful while we're learning to ride better. Or if our horse is unsafe to ride and scares the bejesus out of us, then the groundwork can really bridge that gap. But even once we ride really well, there are periods of time during development where weight on the back is either a help or a hindrance to the next piece of development, the very next small stage of development for our horse. And
Yeah.
then because this horse could suddenly trot, I sort of rubbed my hands together and went, ooh, I'm going to try my lame horse at the trot. I'm going to see how he's doing, right? And the horse that has lameness issues, the only thing I could do with that horse forever was ride. If I did any groundwork at all, he would come up lame. So
Interesting.
he really needed the weight and the mass of the rider, plus the ability to sort of multitask between straightness and braking and pushing and all of that. He needed the aids to be more rapid, and he did much better with weight on his back. And when he looked the same in a groundwork exercise that I was getting under saddle, to me, that was a huge accomplishment.
Hmm.
So him being able to balance himself better in groundwork where there's less support and no weight on his back was a major accomplishment for this horse. And that most people think that would be backwards. And I go, but that was his progress. Doing groundwork for him was a way to test his self-carriage.
Yeah. And I think people, if they could just flip the switch to think that groundwork can be educational and it can be something as simple as a walking, leading exercise, just getting in
Hmm.
sync with your horse, feeling that
Exactly.
connection, that rhythm. Um, it doesn't, and you taught me this, every time I make contact with my horse, it's contact. It's not, oh, I'm just lunging him to wear him out. I'm constantly trying to have a conversation. Even if it's just leading the horse from the pasture to the barn, I'm having a conversation of, hey, and this is intellectually, maybe not visually, but just getting in sync and feeling where's the horse coming from, just in a leading exercise. It doesn't have to be, um, a
Ab
multitask thing.
no, absolutely. That energetic connection and that mental focus on our horse is having a conversation because that's the language of the horse.
Yeah,
Like, even if we're not aware of our energy or our focus or our intention and our mind is sort of somewhere else, we're still talking to the horse because the horse still
they
reads our
hear
body
that. They hear the
language.
grocery list, and I've
Yeah.
only got an hour, and yeah, 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 and they're going, "What are you talking about? I could
Yeah,
care less about your grocery list, or you only have an hour." Like,
exactly. Exactly. They're like, oh, she's venting again.
yeah.
Yep. Eventually they learn it's not personal, but some horses will even take if you're mad at your spouse and you walk in the barn, it's like the horse goes, are you mad at me? Or is there something else going on? Right? Because they just read that energy so clearly.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Like I divide groundwork into two main categories. There is groundwork that I would consider unsupported, which is where we give the horse complete freedom of choice
Mhm.
over how to coordinate their movement, how to coordinate their body, how to balance or not balance. So things like, liberty work, working in a round pen or free lunging, hand walking, even lunging, those are kind of groundwork strategies that leave most of the choices up to the horse. And
Right.
then there's in-hand work, long reins, or a style of lunging called the carpentry lunging, where we're giving more support, like riding. We're actually giving aids through the groundwork exercises to help our horse improve balance or find balance or change the motion. And so we have two very different strategies when we go to groundwork, unsupported work and supported work. And when we ride, we sort of have those same two options, but as soon as we're putting our body in the cart or in the saddle, our weight and mass is already a factor. Even
Yes,
if we're
exactly.
passive, our weight and mass is already a supportive factor or something that the horse has to contend with.
Exactly. It's
Right,
either or.
right.
There's really no in between.
No.
Yeah.
And so I consider all riding, if I just keep my own balance on a loose rein and I'm not even steering too much, I'm still giving support,
Right.
right? So I go all riding is in the category of supporting the horse in order to make a change. So some groundwork exercises are the only way to, in my mind, I use them sometimes to test self-carriage. Where are you with what you know inside your own nervous system?
Mhm.
So if I think I've achieved this high level of balance under saddle, and I just put my horse on a lunge line and say, hey, how do you choose to walk or trot or canter? It shows me what the horse has integrated into their movement and their nervous system or not. Right? So I go, if I take my upper level dressage horse and ask that horse to walk around a lunge line, I'm not expecting high collection, but I also definitely am not going to expect my horse to blow up or pull away or bolt or have a meltdown. I go, but you see that all the time. I
Good
go,
point.
if I put a high level horse in a round pen and just say, hey, could you walk around a little bit or trot or canter? Let's see what you know. And that horse loses the plot. I go, Houston, we have a bigger problem than we think.
Exactly. And I don't know if people see that, I like the way you put it, because I think that's what we do is we ask a question. Hey, could you maintain walk? Could you maintain trot? Instead of the control demand trot. It's like a totally different conversation
Yeah.
when you ask for the walk, trot, canter than if you demand it.
Yeah. And the truth of the training uh, philosophy, the truth or the appropriateness of the training strategies is always in the result that the horse gives you, the response that the
Hmm.
horse gives you. So, for example, if I think I'm getting this, and I did this with my little Arabian mare, I thought I was pretty hot stuff doing, Piaffe and Lavat and Tempi changes and all this cool liberty work. And I throw her on the lunge line one day and I sort of started to just look at the movement on the lunge line. And I sort of asked her the question, if I just ask you to walk a circle, trot a circle, make a canter transition, how do you choose to use your body? Because that
Hmm.
tells me what the nervous system knows, what the habit of movement is inside the horse. And as fancy as I thought I was, my horse stuck her head up in the air, dropped her back, disengaged, and the walk, trot, and canter were completely upside down. And I went, oh, geez, that's not good.
Yeah.
I definitely am missing something, missing the
That's a
point.
that's a good point of examining that and knowing that it's not self-managed. There's no self-carriage at that point.
Zero.
Yeah.
Yeah, zero. And I kind of knew it because the first thing I recognized was, I'm working really hard as a rider to get these
Mm.
collected maneuvers. But at the time, I also thought, well, collection is hard for a horse. So doing collected maneuvers should require a lot of effort on my part. I should
Oh,
be
we
working
love
really
that,
hard.
don't
Yeah.
we?
And
We
the
just
harder I
love that
worked,
as humans. We
the
think
better
it
I
should be
thought I was.
hard.
Yeah. And so it's like the more I thought I was getting better as a rider because I could multitask and I could do more things at once in the saddle. And then it was like, oh, reality check. Your horse does not have balance by
Right.
by choice or self-carriage. And it was kind of a horrifying realization for me at the time, but it really made me go back and re-look at things that I thought I knew and dig deeper and learn more. And now I have to say the absolute opposite is true. Like asking this horse to trot, and without actually ever working on trot for probably a year, he went from a shuffly little Western pleasure, lethargic, peanut rolling, I don't want to trot into kind of a springy, decent trot for 5 minutes from one aid. And I go, that's the result I was looking for. That means I have actually helped the horse develop better balance and self-carriage through the riding and the groundwork. And
Mhm.
I got the part of the reason I tried the trot on the long reins one day was because this horse had he was just a terrible mover, right? He's a quarter horse. He kind of moved like, what we would expect of a quarter horse with bad conformation. And he just had a really clunky, obnoxious canter and never wanted to trot, never wanted to go fast. Everything was slow, 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 heavy to the leg, heavy on the reins. And it was just an uphill battle. And I went to bring him in one night to from the pasture, and I left the gate open for him to just walk in behind another horse. And he decided he would canter in and make a 90-degree turn into the barn at canter. And it was like this beautiful, controlled up canter that he just chose because he wanted to get into his stall for dinner. And I was like, holy cow, when did that happen?
Yeah.
And
And
so
I
like,
think people don't understand that a lot of stuff can be done on the ground or at the walk to achieve this upper level
I
organization.
still, oh, that is the number one thing I hear all the time.
Uh-huh.
Well, the two top things I hear all the time is you can't really develop a horse in groundwork, and you can't
Mm,
really develop a horse in the walk. Like, and I just go, I got 6 horses in my barn right now that I will show you are different, that did both, right? That
right,
absolutely did both. Some of the horses required a lot of groundwork because of lameness issues, because
right.
of even when they started to use their back correctly, it was like those back muscles were weak. They tended to get tight. They would get a little sore. So it was like getting the weight off their back while they're learning to use the back muscles correctly can sometimes be the fastest path. And I go, it's
Yeah,
obvious that we need groundwork if our horse is unsafe to ride. Okay, but that's just step one, right? Going in and out of groundwork during development and groundwork that's unsupported or groundwork that is supported, depending on what's going on. I go, but that absolutely is my strategy. I never know when I'm going to go back to groundwork or when I'm going to ride. It just depends on the responses that the horses are giving me.
yeah, yeah. And to have it to go back to reevaluate, I think is the best thing. And to remember that it can be groundwork maybe should be part of the training program. I forget that. I forget that I don't have to ride every day. That I
Right. Or you
could,
don't have to only ride.
yeah, that maybe, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
And there's more alternatives to not riding than grooming and hand grazing. Like there's a lot of other stuff you can do with your horse on the
hmm,
ground,
yeah,
right? Even taking your horse for walks, if your horse tends to be a little spooky when you trailer load or you go somewhere, it's like even just having a hand walking session with more stimulation or in a new environment or practicing trailer loading so it's not stressful when you need it. Like
good
all of
point.
those things are big picture to the development of the horse.
Yeah, I got to put that trailer loading back on my list.
Yeah. And the other horse in my barn that had all these lameness issues, after the first horse like blew my mind with this trot, I went, oh, I'm going to try it on the other horse. So he willingly trots. The problem is, and it was a decent trot, and he was willing to trot. The problem was the next day he would come up lame.
Mhm.
And so I thought, okay, crossed my fingers, tried 5 minutes of trot on each direction in the groundwork, and then the next day, completely sound. Tried the
Good,
trot again, right? So I started with just 5 minutes of trot work each way, and he maintained his soundness. So now we're doing it more regularly and I can try it under saddle, right? But I go, now we're up to 10 minutes of trot work each way. And the first couple of tries, oh my God, he made my hand turn red on the long reins because he was pulling so
so
hard.
hard.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, we'll just wait for this to lighten up a little bit. And every day that we practiced just 10 minutes each way, he would get lighter and the trot would look better and he could carry himself a little better and no lameness
I think
after
that's a
each
really
session.
good point that you brought up is those, and I just remembered it working with my big mare is those little changes that happen with groundwork. Like you said, my mare going to the left was like a 10 in my left hand.
Like just pulling like crazy. Yes.
Yeah.
Or your
And
palm
so
is like red by the
yeah,
time you're
and
done.
it feels like my shoulder's going to come out of the socket. And
Yeah.
she was having a really hard time just changing direction to the left. It was like you had to get the tractor pull. Come on.
Leverage that
Yeah.
pull. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it got softer with
Well,
that
that's just it.
3 weeks. Yeah.
Heavy rains mean it's a loss of balance.
Yeah. I don't think people realize that because our habit is to pull against it
Yeah. And hold like crazy.
and hold like crazy. Good
Yeah.
point. So
Yeah.
realizing those little changes, oh, look, she's not as heavy going to the left anymore. Those little things. Then I think we forget to add that into the equation of I must be going in the right direction.
Yeah. So sometimes, like a horse pulling the lunge line out of our hand, I go, that is a level of either fear or imbalance that is
Yeah.
significant, right? And then a horse that isn't pulling the lunge line out of our hands, but we're having to use a lot of energy to hang on to the lunge line or not get jerked out of the middle of the circle. That again still speaks to a high level of imbalance or fear or
Right.
both, right? So as we repeat the lunging exercise, our horse should be lighter in our hand if they've been heavy or pulling away in the past. That lightness, that light connection, that ease in our hand on a lunge line is exactly what we can expect under saddle.
Hmm.
I go, it's no different. So if the
Yeah,
horse
it
is
should
pulling
be.
away on the lunge line, that means that they're dysfunctional or scared under saddle. Those two things go together.
Hmm.
Even if we are a little blind to that while we're learning, it is what it is,
Hmm.
and my horse remaining sound and getting lighter in the groundwork exercise also coincided with the trot having more suspension, more control, looking more
Instead of
rhythmic.
falling forward, the horse was actually going more vertical
Yeah, and
off his
and
front end. It makes
and
sense.
holding the engagement. So
Hmm.
instead of stopping and rushing, like his problem was never stopping, it was just going faster and faster and faster,
Hmm.
right? And so for him at first, he would stop a lot or go very slow. And now the development of the trot is the rhythm,
Yeah.
right? The forward energy, but not rushing, balanced with the desire to stop without stopping, right? So it's that self-control that gives the trot rhythm or the canter or the walk, right? So when we have big issues with the horse going way too fast or stopping all the time, that's a loss of balance. When
Right.
they're either cutting into the circle on the lunge line or pulling out, that's a straightness and a steering issue. That's an imbalance, right? So the groundwork can sort of help us go, okay, like a horse on the lunge line that maybe can maintain a decent rhythm in the walk, trot, canter, but is constantly making the circle smaller, smaller, or bigger, bigger, then I go, okay, maybe I need to really focus on straightness with this horse, which will
Hmm.
help the steering, right? If my horse stays roughly on a round circle on a decent size on the lunge line without a lot of pulling or slack, but races forward, suddenly stops. I go, okay, I have a speed issue related to braking and pushing. Let me focus on that a little bit and see if I can improve it. So sometimes the groundwork can be diagnostic.
Hmm.
Sometimes groundwork can be a test of self-carriage to see what the horse really knows in their own coordination. And sometimes the groundwork can be guided support to help with balance in any given direction, but without weight on their back.
Hmm.
So it can be all of those things used at any time through the stages of development. So I love groundwork now. I go, to me, it's as much fun as riding because I'm watching my horse develop.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And then when you got back on, what did you feel that was the difference in your horse after, say, 3 weeks of long reins? What changed from your last ride before the long reins to the first ride you had after working on the ground?
So my left right issue pretty much was gone. She seemed to be able to maintain not getting high on one side or the other. She seemed to be able to keep her,
The
rib cage,
barrel
her
level.
barrel relatively even and level, even on turns. Um, she wasn't bringing her head up. That was, I guess I just didn't feel it when I was riding before, but she was, even to go into halt, what I noticed doing the groundwork was that what happens before what happens. Her head and neck would start to go up before she halted. So
Mm.
interrupting that pattern on the long reins was huge for her. And
And then it
before,
was there under saddle when you got on, you could continue that particular lesson with her under saddle.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
because I'd already initiated it on the groundwork, the thought of this is a continuum. You can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah.
Uh, and I could never get her, and this is probably a big key that I didn't key into. I could never get her to back up on the ground, even.
Mm.
Because I know a lot of people recommend backing up exercises, but I think we need to look at how are they backing up?
Yeah.
Are they going into extension and raising their head just to back up?
Yeah.
So this mare finally figured out, oh, I can put my nose on the ground and back up. And then I knew I'd gotten somewhere. That was about a week and a half, 2 weeks into the groundwork. It was like,
Excellent.
that's a key piece that I hadn't addressed before.
Yeah, and it sort of like can surprise people that that forcing a horse to go backwards sort of misses the point of the lesson or the
Hmm.
exercise, right? Because you could make her go backwards with her head stuck up in the air, but she's big, so it wouldn't be easy and
No,
maybe
it's a lot of
even
work.
and maybe even not safe. But she had to learn. She had to figure out that she could back up with her nose on the ground.
Yeah, that was the huge thing. It's like, oh, that's a big piece for
Yeah.
her that she could. And it's kind of like what I like about groundwork is you can kind of see them thinking, you kind of
Yeah.
see them going, oh, well, let me try this. And that's when I think it's so cool when they
Yeah.
actually say, oh, maybe I could do this. Let's try it.
Yeah. And so letting her figure out that if she put her head down, she could back up
Hmm.
is a much more important lesson than trying to back her up until she dropped her head. Like that just wasn't going to
That's a good
happen
point.
no matter how many years you try to do it. It doesn't
Right.
allow her the space to explore different coordinations.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's the important part of groundwork is it's a time to either allow our horse to explore and feel the repercussions of their choices,
Good
right?
point.
Or to just try something new to seek comfort in their own way at their own time to change their coordination, find a better
Yeah, I
way.
I think that's what it is for me is to give that gift to the horse of that self-carriage and having my horses seek it out in the pasture is the
Yeah,
best part of doing the groundwork is when you see it replicate itself
when they
when you're not.
practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you know, oh yay, juicy stuff.
Yeah,
Yay.
I see my horses out there practicing better balance in the
Yes.
pasture or playing with each other or when they want to come in or when they want to go out.
Yeah.
It's like when they get a little excited, all of a sudden, it's not a canter where I sort of go, oh my God, I hope they don't fall over. It's a beautiful, controlled canter,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I
yeah, and
go,
that's when I love the work we do. It's when it gets to that point, you're like, "Ah, it's worth it, it's worth
they're
it, it's worth it,
learning. They're
it's worth it."
learning. Yes.
They're keeping it, they're maintaining it, and they trust that, and that's what's cool.
Well, it feels better, which is really the whole point of understanding correct mechanics is not to manipulate the horse into a performance frame. It's to teach the horse, just like Alexander technique helps people learn to use their own body more consciously and in a way that feels better. That's the point of training for me, for training for balance, is helping that horse learn a better, more comfortable, more efficient use of the body, no matter what we're doing.
I think that's the most important thing as comparing to the Alexander technique. The Alexander technique is a teaching tool, not a therapy. And
Yeah,
that's
it's not like body work or
right. It's
massage. Yeah,
right. And I think giving that gift to our horses
is huge.
is huge. It's just such a better relationship.
Oh, and I forgot to ask, how was that left rein on the left turn when you got back on your horse
It was
after
fine. It's
groundwork?
fine. And she wasn't, I think the great thing about the long lines is it helps with rotation. So, she would always fall in on the left, and she wasn't doing that anymore.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, so feeling those differences, that's why I keep going back to various groundwork exercises, sometimes to test and sort of see what has the horse learned from all the supportive work, or can I give you support on the ground, maybe with weight off of your back? Could you figure this out in an easier, less
Right.
stressful way?
Right.
So it's like we have lots of options. We don't have to limit, we're not done with groundwork because our horse is safe to ride or because we're riding at such a high level. It's like, no, groundwork is just part of it all the time.
Yeah. It's like we talk about, upper level Olympians or whatever. They cross train. They're not just riding their dressage test. They're doing other things to build up to be able to do the upper level stuff. And I think groundwork is an
Yeah, we
important
could look
part.
at groundwork like CrossFit. Like we're
Hmm.
doing a different activity that's related to riding or performance, but we're doing it in a way that's going to help our horse explore different uses of the body or different coordinations within a job.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like my Alexander technique lessons that were singularly the most helpful to me as a rider. I was nowhere near a horse. I was taking lessons
Dun,
on
da, da,
how to,
dun,
I
dun,
know, I was
dun.
taking regular lessons on how to walk around my kitchen, sit in a chair, eat food. It was like it had nothing to do with
So
riding.
we finally put it out there. Yep. Guess what? We can learn how to ride better off the horse sometimes.
Yeah, I go, that was the groundwork phase of development for me. And
There
again,
you
I
go.
I come back to that kind of groundwork over and over to
Hmm.
take my riding skills to a higher level. We don't
Yep.
have to be on the horse to take the riding skills higher and higher. We can practice our own riding skills while we're doing groundwork with the horse. We can do groundwork for ourselves
Yep.
or working with like the Alexander technique, or I even found Tai Chi super
Oh,
helpful,
yes. Yeah.
right? Super helpful. Tai
Tai
Chi,
Chi,
Qigong,
Qigong.
people
Yep.
swear by yoga, like all kinds of different ways to build balance and coordination and better use of our bodies is the groundwork for us that we can do without our horse even being there.
Right.
There's no room on the yoga mat for my horse, so I'd have to do it without him. So I think let's wrap it up there. I think we sort
Okay.
of talked about groundwork, hopefully in a new way for you horse
Hmm.
owners out there, that if you haven't tried groundwork in a while, it might be a bit of an eye opener to just put your horse on the lunge line and how does your horse choose to move at the walk?
Right. Something simple.
Yeah. I go, the lunge line doesn't have to tire your horse out. Sometimes it's
Right.
just a check-in to see how does my horse choose to move without any support. Anything you want to add?
Oh, that sounds good.
No, I think we can wrap it up there. Thanks everybody for joining us for another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, and we look forward to seeing you back here real soon.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.